This story happened on the west coast of Canada. One early July morning in 2015, as Eric Keane and his team were sailing on a ship off the coast of British Columbia, he heard a strange noise. Eric is a whale researcher and conducted a study on fin whales in the area on his ship. The wailing cries came from the shore of Andrew Rocks, from a large outcrop. A young orca was evidently in distress and was wedged between sharp rocks, sticking out of the water. According to Janie Ray and Herman Muter of Save Our Seas, around 7:30 a.m. Eric called the local environmental group Whale Point to tell them what he had found. Based on Eric's description, the orca experts realized what must have happened. Groups of orcas in this area often band together to hunt and feed on seals. Some orcas chased the seals to shore while others waited patiently to set the trap. The young female orca must have misjudged her position and got into increasingly shallow water with the ebb. Until there was no way to get out of the unfortunate situation. She yelled for help and was obviously scared. Eric was well known to Janie and Herman and often worked closely with them on their research. They were returning to their base from Hartley Bay when he alerted them to the plight of the young orca. Janie and Herman knew time was of the essence and they would need all the help they could get. So while they headed north to join Eric, they also contacted GitGat Emergency in Hartley Bay and Fisheries and Oceans Canada, both marine organizations, to make them aware of the young orca's plight. Meanwhile, Eric and his crew approached the orca to see if they could help it get off the rocks. They didn't get too close to the orca at first, so as not to startle it and prevent it from injuring itself if it tried to escape. Had they tried to lift or pull her off the rocks, serious injury could have resulted. Because the rocks were very pointed and sharp-edged, which could have cut their skin. Anyway, she was bleeding a little from her chest area and her tail. Upon Janie and Herman's arrival, Eric learned that John Ford and Paul Cottrell of the DFO had given instructions over satellite phone to keep the orca cool and wet until the tide rose again. Then she would be able to free herself. However, the tide would not rise again for 8 hours. And so the rescue marathon began. As the humans approached, the orca was obviously confused and scared as to what their intentions could be. Being trapped, uncomfortable and surrounded by people must have been pretty scary for a young whale. Her breathing was rapid and shallow, and gravity was clearly struggling. Whales weigh so much that they are often crushed by their own body weight and unable to breathe. Using a makeshift water pump made from a hose and some tape, Eric and his team made sure the whale didn't dry out. In addition, all rescuers soaked sheets in seawater and carefully laid them along the orca's body. As they worked, rescuers noticed the orca's cries becoming quieter and its breathing slower. It seemed like the humans had gained the orca's trust as they were the ones to comfort her while her own family could only stay nearby in the water and call out to her. Rescuers took turns pumping seawater over the young orca, replacing the sheets covering him with cooler sheets freshly soaked in water. They could see the orca calf's dorsal fin getting dry, so they used a pillowcase from Eric's boat to wet the fin. Luckily the weather had been gray and overcast all morning. But when the sun reached its zenith at noon, the cloud cover broke and the heat of the day began. This weather condition was critical and posed a great danger to the animal. Everyone worked tirelessly to keep the orca cool and wet. People tended to the whale as if it were feverish, exchanging the dry, warm blankets for cooler, damp ones. The rescuers couldn't help but imagine how bad things would have been for the young female orca if Eric hadn't heard her screams. Up until this point, rescuers had not placed anything over the orca's head, lest they panic. If her vision had suddenly been taken away, she could have become restless. But the fierce sun eventually made it absolutely necessary to protect the orca's delicate skin from the heat and dryness. Janie describes watching a member of the team approach the orca. He slowly crept into the water in front of her head and carefully placed a wet, cool cloth over her head, being very careful not to cover her blowhole. The relatively small size of the orca spoke in its favor. He was probably only 8 or 9 years old. The average life expectancy in the wild is between 30 and 50 years. In addition, the animal weighed about 3 tons. While that was the weight of 2 full-grown hippos, a full-grown male orca can weigh up to 10 tons. Had this stranded orca been older and larger, the pressure on its lungs would have been greater and it might not have survived until the next tide. At first the rescue went smoothly. But then bigger problems arose. The water pump eventually broke and there was no way to fix it. The rescue team was forced to change the damp sheets even more quickly to avoid endangering the whale's life. But the people were now more than 7 hours in action and slowly at the end of their strength. But they didn't give up. Fortunately, with the failure of the pump, the sea began to rise again. After a total of 8 grueling hours, the tide had risen enough for rescuers to begin rescuing the young orca. They removed the sheets from her body and head and the pillowcase from her dorsal fin. The team knew the time had come for the orca to do what they were working towards, swim out of its rocky prison on its own. They didn't want their presence to tempt them into trying too soon and injuring themselves even more severely. So they went away and climbed a nearby cliff to watch the event from there. Everyone felt the same and wished her strength and hoped that she could free herself. Had the hours of tireless effort paid off? The water level slowly began to climb up the young orca's body until it covered her. When this happened, she started screaming again, but this scream seemed different. Maybe it was the excitement that she could soon be freed. And yet she lay there, occasionally raising her tail but making no move to swim. Her rescuers were beginning to worry. They wondered if something was wrong. Maybe she was hurt more than they thought. Perhaps she was too exhausted from the long ordeal to attempt this last epic escape. But they remained patient and continued to fear. By wagging her tail, the wood lady tested the depth of the water, and when she knew it was safe and would not risk harm, she suddenly lashed out with 2 mighty thrusts. Free from the rocks, she rushed through the sea. From their boats and the rocks, the rescuers shouted euphorically, "Well done, girls," and cheered with joy and relief that they had made it. The young orca was finally able to swim back to his family and escaped with a few scratches and a shock. Please give me a thumbs up for this story and subscribe to the channel for free so you won't miss any more videos. Now watch a video of a orca stranded on beach.